Captain Sarah Chen of the U.S. Maverick was having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday when the laws of bureaucracy caught up with humanity. The ship's sensors had just picked up an unusual energy signature while surveying the Epsilon Eridani system when Communications Officer Raj Patel's console lit up like a Christmas tree. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Raj announced, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Well, it appears to be a complaint form." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A complaint form? From whom?" Before Raj could answer, a massive vessel materialized before them, its hull covered in what appeared to be filing cabinets arranged in perfect geometric patterns. The ship's surface was painted in various shades of beige and gray, with occasional splashes of what could only be described as office carpet green. "Attention unauthorized vessel," a precisely modulated voice transmitted. "You are in violation of Spatial Navigation Form 27B/6, subsection Delta, regarding proper announcement of arrival in a categorized star system. Please prepare to receive Citation Package Alpha and the required documentation for retroactive travel permission." Sarah exchanged glances with her first officer, Mike O'Malley, who was trying very hard not to smile. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the U.S. Maverick, representing Earth and the United Solar Federation. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations." There was a long pause before the alien voice returned, now sounding distinctly distressed. "Unacceptable. You must first file Form 123X/9, intent to establish first contact, with the Department of Sinological Relations. This must be submitted in triplicate, with attached appendices detailing your species' bureaucratic history and preferred filing systems." "I'm sorry," Sarah replied, maintaining her diplomatic tone despite the absurdity of the situation. "We weren't aware of these requirements. Perhaps we could meet in person to discuss." "Meet in person?" The alien voice rose several octaves. "Without filing an F-35/Q, request for physical interaction. Without completing the mandatory 47-step decontamination paperwork. Without appointing a designated form filing officer." The voice paused for what seemed to be a calming breath. "What kind of barbarians are you?" Lieutenant Commander Jessica Wong, the ship's science officer, was frantically taking readings of the alien vessel. "Captain," she whispered, "their ship appears to be powered by bureaucratic energy. I'm detecting massive amounts of paperwork-based quantum fluctuations." Sarah bit her lip to suppress a laugh. "Perhaps we could start with something simpler. We could share information about our cultures." "Information sharing," multiple voices screeched in unison from the alien ship. "That requires at least 7 different permits, 13 forms of clearance, and a notarized statement of purpose signed by no less than 5 department heads." The alien vessel's filing cabinet-like sections began to shift and reorganize themselves, presumably into some sort of defensive formation. Sarah noticed it was taking an extraordinarily long time, probably due to the need to file the proper paperwork for each movement. "Look," Sarah tried again, "we're explorers. We believe in cutting through red tape to achieve our goals." A horrified gasp echoed through the communication channel. You cut tape. The sacred bonds that hold documentation together. This is worse than we thought." The alien ship's lights began flashing in what appeared to be a pattern representing urgent memo circulation. Mike leaned over to Sarah. "Captain, I think we just committed some sort of bureaucratic sacrilege." The alien voice returned, now reading from what sounded like a very long document. "By order of the Grand Bureaucratic Consortium, you are hereby required to attend an emergency cultural orientation session. Please prepare to receive the following forms. Application for Emergency Cultural Orientation. Form 972E. Waiver of Standard Procedural Requirements. Form 445B. Emergency Protocol Exception Request. Forms 89X through 94X, and the standard 2,403-page manual on proper form filing etiquette." Sarah looked at her crew, all of whom were displaying various stages of contained amusement. "And if we decline?" "Decline," The word was spoken as if it was completely foreign. There is no form for declining. The concept does not exist within our regulatory framework. You will be educated in the proper ways of bureaucratic civilization. Resistance will result in additional paperwork. The Maverick's sensors detected several smaller vessels emerging from the alien ship, each one shaped like different office supplies. One looked like a stapler, another like a 3-ring binder. "Captain," Raj reported, struggling to keep a straight face, "they're launching what appears to be an interdepartmental memo distribution fleet." Sarah stood from her captain's chair, straightening her uniform. "Well, crew, it seems humanity's first contact with advanced alien civilization is going to require a lot of paperwork. Mr. Patel, please inform Earth Command of our situation, and add a request for them to send us a really big printer." As the Maverick's crew prepared to face their most bureaucratic challenge yet, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of space, there was an alien civilization that had mastered the art of efficiency. But for now, they would have to navigate this maze of paperwork and protocols, armed with nothing but human ingenuity and an increasingly strong urge to introduce these aliens to the concept of digital documentation. The alien vessels continued their approach, moving at what could only be described as standard office pace, each movement presumably requiring its own set of approval forms. Sarah had a feeling this was going to be either humanity's greatest diplomatic challenge or its most amusing adventure yet, possibly both. "Captain," Jessica called out, "they're sending us their first batch of forms. The computer estimates it would take approximately 47 years to complete them all at normal filing speed." "Well," Sarah replied with a grin, "I guess it's time to show them how humans handle paperwork. Mr. O'Malley, prepare the coffee maker. We're going to need it." And so began humanity's introduction to the galactic bureaucracy, not with a bang, but with the sound of 1,000 printers warming up simultaneously somewhere in the vast, form-filled void of space. The consortium's central processing station looked exactly like what would happen if someone gave an office supplies company unlimited resources and told them to build a space station. The massive structure was shaped like an immense filing cabinet, complete with labeled drawers that served as docking bays. Each label was written in perfect bureaucratic standard font, size 12, double-spaced. Captain Sarah Chen and her diplomatic team from the U.S. Maverick stood in what the consortium called the preliminary processing chamber for unexpected species integration, trying not to stare at the walls covered in motivational posters with messages like, "A filed form is a happy form," and "proper documentation prevents cosmic chaos." "Welcome, primitive species representatives," announced Senior Administrative Processor X2547B, who had insisted they call him SAP for short, though it had taken him 20 minutes to file the proper form for nickname authorization. "We will now begin your orientation to proper civilization." Sarah watched as her crew tried to maintain their composure. Lieutenant Commander Wong was particularly fascinated by a consortium worker carefully measuring the angle of their desk nameplate with a digital protractor. "Perhaps," Sarah suggested diplomatically, "you could tell us more about how your society functions." SAP brightened, pulling out what appeared to be a presentation tablet. "Of course. But first, please fill out Form 782C, Request for Information about Societal Functions, along with supplementary Forms 782C1 through 782C47, detailing your specific areas of interest." Or, First Officer O'Malley interjected, "You could just tell us." The entire room fell silent. Several consortium workers nearby dropped their styluses in shock. One actually fainted, carefully following the proper procedure for unconsciousness by filling out a notice of temporary cognitive discontinuity before hitting the floor. "Just tell you." SAP's voice trembled. "Without proper documentation, without following the established channels of information dissemination." He pulled out a small paper bag after quickly filing Form 999P, Emergency Paper Container Usage Request, and began breathing into it. Sarah decided to try a different approach. "We notice your ships are quite organized. Would you be willing to show us your engineering section?" After only 45 minutes of paperwork, they were led to what the consortium called the Department of Controlled Energy Management and Systematic Propulsion Generation. The humans stared in amazement at what they saw. The engine room was a masterpiece of inefficiency. Every power coupling had its own dedicated filing system. Each energy pulse had to be logged, stamped, and approved by 3 different departments before it could move to the next circuit. The main reactor wouldn't start until all safety checklists were completed in triplicate and properly filed with the Department of Nuclear Documentation. "This is how you power your ships?" Jessica Wong asked, her scientific curiosity warring with her practical nature. "Of course." The chief engineering processor beamed. "Each quantum fluctuation is carefully regulated, documented, and archived. It takes only 7 to 8 business days to achieve full power." Mike O'Malley couldn't help himself. "We usually just flip a switch." The chief engineering processor staggered backward. A switch. Just one switch. Without redundant approval mechanisms, without proper power-up documentation. He quickly began filling out what appeared to be a Form 666S. Report of shocking and potentially dangerous technological revelations. But it was Raj Patil who accidentally started the revolution. While examining what appeared to be a simple power converter, he noticed it was running at barely 20% efficiency. Without thinking, he reached over and adjusted 2 settings. The efficiency immediately jumped to 90%. Alarms began blaring throughout the station. ALERT. Unauthorized optimization DTTTE. This is not in ACSU or DANC with regulation 47X/9 REG or DIing proper EFS. Sci-Fi Stories. A young consortium engineer who had been watching the proceedings with poorly concealed interest spoke up. "But it's working better now." "Better?" CAP looked horrified. "Better is not the point. The point is proper procedure. Form over function. Documentation over results." But the young engineer was still staring at the power readings. "It's simple," she whispered, as if discovering a forbidden concept. Several other junior staff members gathered around, their eyes wide with wonder. "This is exactly what we feared," Saig declared. "The humans are spreading their chaos. Their efficiency." He turned to his staff. "Quick. Everyone begin filing Form 1313D. Defense against foreign technological corruption." But Sarah noticed something interesting. While the senior staff frantically began their paperwork, the younger consortium members were watching the humans with increasing interest. One was even caught trying to optimize a data terminal without filing the proper forms first. "Captain," Jessica whispered, "I think we might have just started something." Sarah nodded, watching as the young engineer continued to study the improved power converter, hiding her observations in what appeared to be a personal datapad rather than official documentation. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander, I believe we have. The question is, what will the consortium do about it?" As if in answer, another alarm began to sound. "Attention, all personnel. Mandatory emergency and anti-efficiency training will begin in all CCTRs. Please file Forms 2245T through 2299T to ACKNEG the SANONC. Sarah exchanged glances with her crew. They had come seeking diplomatic relations, and instead might have accidentally sparked a revolution of common sense and practical solutions in a galaxy drowning in paperwork. "Well," she said quietly to her team, "I guess this is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable bureaucracy." The young engineer, still pretending to file proper documentation, caught Sarah's eye and gave her the smallest of conspiratorial winks. Perhaps the immovable bureaucracy wasn't quite as immovable as it appeared. SAP was now organizing an emergency committee to investigate the proper procedures for investigating emergency committees. But the seeds of change had been planted, and no amount of paperwork could stop an idea whose time had come, especially when that idea was as simple as, maybe we don't need a form for everything. The revolution began, appropriately enough, with a paper jam. 3 weeks after the U.S. Maverick's arrival at the Central Processing Station, a junior processor named Index 7 stood before the sacred printer of Sector 7, staring at the dreaded paper jam in Tray 2 message. According to consortium regulations, this required Form 447G, Initial Paper Jam Report, Form 448G, Request for Paper Jam Investigation, Form 449G, Assembly of Paper Jam Committee, Forms 450G through 457G, Individual Committee Member Appointments. Index 7 looked left, looked right. Then, in an act of unprecedented rebellion, she opened the printer and simply removed the jammed paper. The printer worked perfectly. "What have you done?" whispered her colleague. File 12, both horrified and fascinated. "Where's the paperwork? Where's the committee? It just worked better this way," Index 7 replied, her voice trembling with the thrill of efficiency. "Like the humans showed us." The word spread through the junior ranks like wildfire, though calling it a fire would have required Form 999F. Report of metaphorical flame usage. Young consortium members began gathering in secret, sharing tales of problems solved without proper documentation, of tasks completed without 17 layers of approval. They called themselves the Pragmatists. Captain Sarah Chen and her crew watched these developments with a mixture of amusement and concern. They had been detained on the station while the consortium's Supreme Council of Procedural Oversight debated the proper forms needed to either establish diplomatic relations or declare war. They hadn't decided which yet. "Captain," Raj reported one morning, "I've been monitoring internal communications. The young consortium members are starting to use shortcuts." He whispered the last word as if it were forbidden knowledge. Sarah nodded. The signs were everywhere if you knew where to look. Desk angles now varied by up to 3 degrees from regulation. Some junior staff had begun submitting reports in single-spaced format. One particularly bold soul had been caught using a paperclip instead of the mandatory triple staple configuration. The breaking point came during the Great Coffee Crisis. It started when Mike O'Malley introduced some young consortium members to the concept of coffee breaks. The efficiency-boosting effects of caffeine combined with informal social interaction sent shockwaves through the bureaucratic system. This beverage, declared Senior Administrative Processor X2547B, still called SAP, is a threat to proper procedure. Look at them, talking without filing conversational intent forms, making decisions without consulting the manual of acceptable break time topics. But it was too late. The pragmatists had discovered something even more dangerous than coffee: water cooler conversation. "Did you know?" one young processor whispered to another, "the humans solve problems by just doing things," without filling out requests for problem-solving permission forms. The consortium leadership tried to crack down. They implemented mandatory form filing quotas. They established the Department of Anti-Efficiency Enforcement. They even tried to ban unauthorized smiling. But you can't stop an idea whose time has come. The revolution reached its peak when a group of junior officers, led by the now infamous Index 7, submitted a proposal to optimize the station's power grid. The document was 3 pages long. Just 3 pages, no appendices, single-spaced. The senior staff nearly had a collective breakdown. "This is madness," Saeed declared, waving the document as if it were radioactive. "Where are the supplementary forms? The committee review requests? The impact assessments of the impact assessments?" "It works," Index 7 said simply, standing before the Supreme Council. "We tested it." "Tested it?" SAP's voice rose to a shriek. "Without forming a testing oversight committee. without filing the proper test implementation documentation. Yes, she replied, her voice steady. Like the humans do. The chamber erupted into chaos, though proper chaos documentation forms were still filed afterward. The senior staff demanded immediate disciplinary action, which would require only 152 different forms and approximately 6 months to process. But then something unexpected happened. A warning klaxon sounded throughout the station. The main power grid, laboring under the weight of its own inefficiency, was beginning to fail. According to proper procedure, addressing this crisis would require formation of an emergency response committee, 2 to 3 weeks. Approval of emergency response protocols, 1 to 2 months. Implementation of approved emergency measures, 4 to 6 months. Post-emergency documentation, indefinite. The station had approximately 6 hours before critical failure. Sarah Chen watched as the senior staff frantically began pulling out emergency forms, their hands shaking as they tried to follow proper procedure in the face of imminent disaster. Then Index 7 stepped forward again. "We can fix this," she said. "Without the forms, without the committees, we just need you to let us work." TAP looked from his stack of forms to the flashing warning lights and back again. For the first time in his career, he faced a choice between procedure and survival. "The forms," he whispered weakly. "The sacred procedures. Will get us all killed," Index 7 finished. She turned to her fellow pragmatists. "Who's with me?" One by one, young consortium members stepped forward. Some dropped their styluses. Others closed their form tablets. A few even dared to loosen their regulation with ties. Sarah caught O'Malley's eye and nodded. "I think," she said quietly, "we're about to see what happens when bureaucracy meets necessity." The time had come for the consortium to learn that sometimes, just sometimes, you had to think outside the box, even if thinking outside the box required Form 999B, Request for Non-Standard Cognitive Processing. The next few hours would change the consortium forever. The only question was, would they survive their own red tape long enough to see it? The next 6 hours aboard the Central Processing Station became known in consortium history as the Great Simplification, though traditionalists still refer to it as the procedural emergency of unprecedented proportions that really should have been properly documented. Index 7 and her team of rebel efficiency experts moved with shocking speed, literally shocking to the senior staff, who had never seen anyone move faster than regulation walking pace. The humans from U.S. Maverick joined them, bringing their expertise in actually getting things done. "The main power core is running at 12% efficiency," Jessica Wong reported, scanning the systems. "They have 17 different regulatory subroutines checking each power pulse before allowing it through." "Disable them," Index 7 ordered, causing several senior staff members to clutch their pearls, which were, of course, regulation size and properly documented. "You can't just disable safety protocols," Sei protested. Form 62D clearly states. The lights flickered ominously. 5 hours until total system failure, Raj announced. Sarah Chen stepped forward. "SAP, I know this goes against everything you believe in. But right now, you have a choice. Follow proper procedure and watch this station fail, or let us help you save it." SAP looked around at his beloved station, with its perfectly organized filing systems and meticulously documented processes. Then he did something unprecedented in consortium history. He improvised. "Do it," he whispered, looking as if the words physically pained him. "But please, try to fill out at least some of the forms afterward." The next few hours were a blur of activity that would give nightmares to any proper bureaucrat. Index 7's team, working with the Mavericks crew, began systematically streamlining the station's systems. Power regulation protocols reduced from 17 steps to 2. Emergency response time decreased from pending proper documentation to immediate. Decision-making processes streamlined from committee review to just do it. The horror of the senior staff reached new heights when someone suggested using sticky notes for temporary labeling instead of properly filed label request forms. "But that's not regulation adhesive," one administrator wailed. "The regulations are trying to kill us." Index 7 shot back, slapping another sticky note onto a control panel. 4 hours into the crisis, they hit their first major obstacle. The primary power distribution network required a full restart, but the restart sequence was buried under so many layers of administrative protection that even Index 7 couldn't bypass them. "There has to be a way," Sarah said, studying the system. It was then that SAP, still looking deeply uncomfortable with this whole situation, cleared his throat. "There is an unauthorized backdoor in the system." Everyone turned to stare at him. "I may have created it," he admitted, "for emergencies, without filing the proper paperwork." He looked around nervously. "I never used it. I just kept it, just in case." Index 7's eyes widened. You created an unauthorized system modification." SAP straightened his perfectly regulation tie. "Even a senior administrative processor can recognize the occasional need for expedience, though I will deny saying that if anyone tries to document it." With SAP's secret backdoor, they were able to restart the power grid. The efficiency improvements began to take effect immediately. Power levels stabilized. Emergency systems came back online. 1 hour before projected failure, the station was running better than it had in its entire history. The young engineers stared in amazement at their displays. "Power efficiency at 89%, one reported. Emergency response time reduced by 97%. Overall system performance improved by 1,247%. And how many forms did it take?" Index 7 asked with a slight smile. "None," the engineer replied, sounding both scandalized and thrilled. The senior staff huddled in a corner, looking shell-shocked. Decades of procedural certainty had just been upended in a matter of hours. Some were still clutching blank forms like security blankets. "What have we done?" one whispered. "We survived," SAP replied, surprising everyone. He was staring at the efficiency readings with an unreadable expression. "Though I expect the paperwork for this will take decades to complete." Sarah approached him. "Or," she suggested gently, "you could consider this an opportunity. A chance to find a balance between documentation and efficiency, between procedure and practicality." A balance. SAP repeated the word as if it was a foreign concept, which in the consortium, it was. "Think about it," Sarah continued. "What if you could maintain order without drowning in it? Keep records without being enslaved by them?" "Impossible," one administrator declared. It would never work. But others weren't so sure. They had seen the impossible today. A crisis solved without proper documentation, problems fixed without committees, decisions made without forms in triplicate. And the station hadn't descended into chaos. The universe hadn't ended. In fact, everything was working better than ever. "Perhaps," SAP said slowly, "it is time for the consortium to consider updating our procedures." A gasp ran through the chamber. "You mean?" Index 7 could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes," SAP nodded gravely. "I believe it is time to form a committee to investigate the possibility of reducing the number of committees required to form new committees." It wasn't exactly a revolution, but for the consortium, it was a start. As the humans and their newfound allies began planning for the future, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Sometimes, the greatest changes didn't come through force or violence, but through simple common sense, even if it took a near catastrophe to make people see it. The great simplification had begun. The galaxy would never be the same, though someone would probably still have to file the paperwork for that. 6 months after the great simplification, the central processing station was unrecognizable. Well, mostly unrecognizable. It still looked like a giant filing cabinet in space, but now it was a highly efficient giant filing cabinet in space. The changes had swept through the consortium like a very well-organized wildfire. The younger generation, led by Index 7, now promoted to Director of Innovative Solutions, a title that had required only 3 forms to approve instead of the usual 300, had transformed the bureaucracy from within. Captain Sarah Chen and the crew of the U.S. Maverick stood in what used to be the preliminary processing chamber for unexpected species integration, now simply called the Welcome Center, watching as SAP prepared to make a historic announcement. Fellow members of the consortium, he began, standing at a podium that was almost, but not quite, perfectly aligned with the room's grid system. Today marks the implementation of the new Reasonable Protocol guidelines. The chamber was packed with both traditional bureaucrats and young reformers. Some of the old guard still clutched their beloved forms, but even they had to admit things were running smoother these days. Our first quarter results are in, SAP continued, holding up a single sheet of paper, a sight that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Overall efficiency is up 3,000%. Emergency response time has been reduced from pending proper documentation to immediate. And most importantly, he paused for dramatic effect. Our paper consumption is down 99.9%. Several senior administrators dabbed at their eyes with regulation handkerchiefs. But perhaps most remarkable, SAP said, is what we've learned from our human friends. They showed us that there is a middle path between chaos and paralysis, between complete freedom and absolute control. The changes were visible everywhere. Desk angles now had a reasonable tolerance of 5 degrees. The sacred printer of Sector 7 had been replaced with a more efficient model that didn't require 3 forms to change its toner. Some brave souls were even experimenting with casual Fridays, though there was still a 1-page form required to wear non-regulation socks. We've created something new, Index 7 added, joining SAP at the podium, a system that preserves the best of our organizational skills while embracing the human concept of getting things done. The new consortium was a hybrid of efficiency and organization. They still had forms, but now they were digital and autofilling. They still had committees, but they met only when actually needed. They even still had their beloved protocols, but streamlined to the point where they helped rather than hindered. And now, SAP announced, to commemorate this historic occasion, we will perform the newly approved ceremony of reasonable celebration. The humans watched in amazement as the consortium members performed what could only be described as a slightly stiff but enthusiastically attempted party. Some were still checking their tablets to ensure they were celebrating within acceptable parameters, but others had fully embraced the spirit of controlled chaos. I never thought I'd see a bureaucrat dance, Mike O'Malley whispered to Sarah. I never thought I'd see a bureaucrat dance without filing a dance permit first, Raj added. The celebration was interrupted by an urgent message on the main screen. Another alien species had made contact with the consortium, and they appeared to be even more rigid and protocol-obsessed than the consortium had been. They're demanding we follow their 7 million steps of proper first contact, a communications officer reported. The room fell silent. 6 months ago, this would have been the consortium's dream scenario. A chance to engage in endless procedural negotiations and form-filling. SAP and Index 7 exchanged glances. Send them our new standardized greeting package, SAP decided. The 1-page version. And if they insist on their protocols? Someone asked. Then, Index 7 smiled. We'll show them what we learned from the humans about efficiency. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. The consortium had not only embraced change, they were ready to export it to the rest of the galaxy. As the celebration resumed, Sarah gathered her crew. Their mission to establish diplomatic relations had succeeded, though not in any way they could have predicted. They had come seeking allies and found them not through formal treaties or elaborate protocols, but through the simple act of showing a better way. Captain, Jessica Wong said, checking her tablet, Earth Command wants to know if we should send diplomats or efficiency experts for the formal alliance ceremony. Sarah watched as a group of young consortium members taught some of the older administrators how to use emoji in their official communications. "Tell them to send both," she replied. "Something tells me the galaxy is about to get a lot more interesting and a lot more efficient." The revolution was complete. The consortium had found its balance between order and chaos, between procedure and practicality. They had learned that sometimes the best solution was the simplest one, even if it took a few forms to implement it. And somewhere in the station's vast archives, in a folder labeled Historical Documents of Significant Change, sat a single sticky note with 3 words written on it: "Just do it." Though, of course, the sticky note had been properly documented. Some habits die hard.